play his video.
Oh no.
And this is my presentation for the Time To Wait 8 conference, and it's called Non-Contact Format Agnostic Audio Retrieval from Magnetic Carriers, which is based on a paper that I've written and follows on from a previous presentation that I gave at some point at the university where I work, at the University of Central Lancashire here in Preston in the north of England. I want to start with an imagined scene from a sci-fi movie. A person finds an old tape in the attic and takes it to a local library, puts it into a machine that looks a bit like a modern version of the one that I'm going to show in the slide, puts it in and presses the scan button, and then some 10 seconds later, the resulting audio is deposited in a mobile phone, so it goes ping, and there is the audio that whatever that tape was, and for the first time, the person can listen to the granddad's voice. The reason I put that little imagined scene out there is that when I started researching into that, I also became aware of the magnetic tape alert project from EASA and the Save Our Sounds initiative from the British Library Sound Archive. And I apologize if many of you are already familiar with this, but I'm just going to go over this ground as quickly as I can. It's necessary to make the point that I'm trying to make. So just a quick rebrief, I guess, as it were, right? Anyway, so the one of the startling facts is that more audio heritage resides on magnetic tape across the world than there are resources and time to digitize and archive it. Roughly speaking, that's the gist. This is made even more urgent by the fact that the magnetic carriers, the tape itself, is deteriorating, is flaking, is whatever, breaking up, and it's doing so rather quickly, and the older it is, the more urgent it becomes quite naturally. And there is those two things put together that we will not have, or we currently do not have, enough resources across the world to archive all the material that resides on magnetic tape, plus that the tape is deteriorating, leads to the fact that eventually we will run out, and all the threat that audio heritage may simply vanish, literally disappear, is actually very, very real. So the question then is, will we just stop archiving audio from tape once we reach the critical point whereby all devices are irreparable, the engineers are all dead, and whatever, and there's no spare parts left anywhere in the world, and the tape, is carries on sitting there and rotting? Are we suggesting that at that point we just say, okay, that's it, folks, we're gonna stop archiving? It seems that questions nobody is answering or even posing that question. All efforts are in upping the amount of digitization, the speed of digitization, the maintenance of the machines, buying all the machines, and so on and so on. There's no effort to future-proof in the sense of what I'm trying to make a case for here. So if we think about what the current system is, so we know we're running out of playback devices and all this, and there have been many speculations as to when the deadline is. Mike Casey in an EASA article, and Dietrich Schiller and Adam Toll, they all put different end dates when they're speculated in previous years and previous presentations. I think that is more or less by the by. It will slowly ebb out, but at the moment, the current process is that of playback, analog to digital conversion, and then the archival process. If you would turn up with a tape of this kind of type, or any type, a cassette or whatever it may be, to a library, then a playback device that can play that particular type of tape will have to be found some information will have to be deducted from the tape, the physicality of it, in this case the leader dictating what speed it runs at and what track format it is. A playback device has to be found. If a playback device cannot be found, the contents on that tape will be lost. It doesn't mean the tape is lost. It means that the content residing on the tape will be lost if we don't find the appropriate playback device. But the main point I'm trying to make here, which is where the non-contact and the format agnostic part of this case is coming from, is that we do not find the appropriate device, or we think the tape is too damaged, or cannot be wound properly without being damaged, then the content on the tape is lost. That is kind of quite tragic and happens in many, many cases. We have to understand that when I say non-contact, that the format agnostic part of the thing I'm proposing here almost comes off the back of the non-contact, by which I mean that if I photograph something without the playback device, then there is nothing that needs to be calibrated. And a lot of limitations of the recording device and subsequently the playback device, those two will always add, the limitations and the distortions and the noises and whatever disturbances there may be will simply fall away if we take it that the current process is destructive, as in it's physical and pretty harsh in terms of reel-to-reel forces on tape and tape heads, and is absolutely format dependent, as in if we don't have the right format, we will lose the audio, plus the fact that eventually we will no longer have the devices to play things back. So we need something. Now, I am not purely speculating. In 2008, Terry Ferret from West Virginia University did his master's dissertation on retrieving audio from a cassette tape using an magnetic force microscope. Okay, pure sine waves, and his aim was to see, understand, and prove that he could retrieve erased audio data from tapes. So he was recording pure sine waves onto cassette tape, scanning those with a magnetic force microscope, then erasing it in the cassette recorder, putting it back in and rescanning it, and retrieved the erased waveforms and could restore them back almost to the quality of the original scan. Now, it's pure sine waves, not complex audio. Cassette tape, limited scope in terms of frequency response and so on. All the same, the research is there. This is 2008, only 2 years after Vadileev started with the research on and publishes what is now the Arene project. There is a system out there that is already working right now. Sometimes in 95, 93 or something like that, there was a guy called Pappas for forensic analysis of tape, and he used an electron microscope to do something similar. He was trying to show and prove authenticity of a tape recording. Is this a copy of a copy, and so on. This was for forensic purposes. I have not found other than the one paper on that. So my feeling is that research got locked somewhere. In fact, I think the researcher itself, Pappas, went to be some tech head at the FBI or something. Anyway, so the research has been out there in little pockets that are not necessarily for archiving or conservation purposes, but all the same, hitting in the right direction. So what I'm proposing here is not just blue sky thinking. I understand the challenges, and I can see the two sides that rub a little. One is ethical, so those are how to conserve the historical context and the cultural context of whatever is on those tapes, and how important that is, and how little we should interfere with how it is on the artifact, which is the actual tape, and the desire at the same time to, like with Irene, remove his as we digitizing, remove limitations as we digitizing, remove timing differences as we digitizing. Then the next step is, hey, couldn't we generate some overtones to make it sound a bit more modern? Where is that line? So those technical, ethical discussions, need to be had, and the standard needs to be open. So my conviction is that wherever this may go, it cannot be a locked system or algorithm. It cannot be a commercial system. It has to be something that is community-based, open source, so that it is available cheaply and freely and easily to the community at large. It's quite difficult right now to get any analog audio digitized professionally without either paying a huge amount of money, waiting for a very, very long time, or if you already have a large collection, like the BBC going to the British Library, say, if you don't sit on a big collection, which takes priority in the big institutions, if you're a private owner, like me, that happens to have a couple of hundred reels, of stuff that may or may not be culturally relevant, depending on what you think. To my mind, all of it is relevant. And all of it needs to be preserved, or as much of it as possible needs to be preserved. There's also a little bit of this social kind of divide in there. So if you take, for example, the TC03 guidelines and then look at a presentation at the AES conference in 2023, where a researcher from Paraguay, he was actually researching into noise reduction of analog tape, which is what he was presenting, but he used it on audio, historical audio tapes. And he used home equipment, a small little everyday interface, a small little tape recorder. So nothing that would pass strict TC03 guidelines, say, as it has to be a Studer 807 with an azimuth control and an oscilloscope attached to it and a bank of engineers kind of servicing and doing the job. So that was a researcher sitting in his university office doing it on a small desk like this. And I think rightly so. He said, well, preserve it professionally or don't preserve it. I rather preserve it with what I've got. I'd rather save it than wait for becoming rich and doing it. And he was quite, when I spoke to him, he was quite determined about that quality as such, even with home equipment these days, is becoming better and better, and is well adequate enough for digitizing old, limited quality footage from audio from magnetic tapes. Some transfer function, my hunch is it will be based on magnetic force microscopy, but it could be some other imprinting function that we have not yet explored. Will have to come to the fore. And I would like to plant the seed in people's heads and perhaps at some point in a larger forum have more detailed and technical discussions about the ins and outs of such systems and the requirements of it. And maybe even start putting that down in some sort of document that can be a seeding point. In conclusion, I hope that I could make the case somewhat that a non-contact, format agnostic retrieval system of magnetic tape that incorporates some algorithmic processing for the reconstruction of the audio that sits on the tape is a necessity and not just wishful thinking. Now, I'm fully aware that development cost, research time, the engineering challenges, all these things exist. And on top of it, even more so, the ethical and philosophical challenges of preservation, archiving, and restoration. And I'm aware of all that. I'm trying to figure out that one central question, which is, what are we going to do once we run out of the engineers, we run out of the machines, and we still have over half of the world's audio heritage sitting on tapes? And I think now is the time to think ahead, to develop those kind of things. And I hope I was able to point out that there are some developments in the making that point in that direction, ever so gently and slowly perhaps at this time. And I'm not claiming to be the engineer that would put the system together. It has to be a collaboration. But in the paper that is associated with this presentation, I do go a little deeper into some of the more ethical aspects and questions. And I hope that once this is published and followed on by further papers that will dig more into the technology aspects of it, maybe it will stimulate enough discussion for at some point to have some sort of forum in which people can discuss this without the baggage of guidelines or the over enthusiastic approach of some software engineers or whatever. That we can just take the facts as they are, look at what the challenges are, what the current things are, and what is a future-proof way of looking at archiving audio from magnetic sources. I hope that's it. And I hope you have questions so that I don't have to do this talking to the camera thing here, because it's kind of awkward. Thank you.
Now we have Peter online for your questions and comments. So please go ahead, have a question, have a comment. All right.
Is there anything? No?
Hello, I haven't understood. Did you have already practical results? Because right now I know at least
Time to Wait
3 institutions and people that working on non-contact format. Last year also I presented some technology like that. So do you have already some touchable practical results? Thank you.
I'm sorry, Peter, were you able to hear the question, or you need it restated?
Not quite clearly.
The question was there a practical result already in your studying of this problematic? Or?
The only practical result was from West Virginia, which was Terry Farrett's research, but they were only limited to sine waves for now, and there are some very clear images that are very similar to the output from Fadeyev on the IRENE system in the Library of Congress. So it's a proven principle, which is why I'm quite hopeful that it might work. In terms of the thing is, it works on, so far, it's the system is essentially so if this is the tape, it's a cantilever with a tiny, tiny probe that can scan a small segment at atomic level, essentially, seeing the magnetic patterns on the whatever it is a 20 microns or so of magnetic layer on the tape. So it takes a lot of time, and at the moment it has only been done with pure sine waves that have been deliberately put onto new tape. How that would translate into tapes, say, that Nadia showed before the break, that are already warped and all this kind of stuff. That remains to be seen. But then again, recently, I don't know if you're aware of the Pompeii scrolls that have been scanned. Even though they were burned and they're scanned through the late 500-year-old shopping list or whatever it was. So there is science and there are results out there. And this is 2008, so I guess people will be working in pockets on similar systems.
That's a question.
I'll go over to the audience side for my question. I guess I was curious, because you were talking about just the degradescence issue, that it's soon, because of all the obsolescence, going to be no longer possible to transfer, but you're also making the case that there are a lot of technological improvements that make it easier to capture. So I'm curious, if you had a precious tape you had to transfer in a time machine, would you go back to the past to do the transfer, or risk it and go into the future?
The thing is, at the moment, we will always say, ideally you want to have the machine that recorded the tape in the first place to play it back. That would be the one-to-one thing. Although, with current knowledge, I would say every analog system, playback system, would put stress on the tape, will add another system inherent layer of noise at the time of playback, much as a layer of system noise has been added at the point of recording. And arguably at the point of analog to digital conversion, which is another point that you guys have been discussing here. But improvement is a really tricky one. I had a discussion with Dietrich Schüller, and it was so fascinating because on one hand, the Irene process eliminates a lot of the vagaries from the grooves and the clicks and the cracks, and that seems to be perfectly acceptable, generally speaking, in archiving, from what I read. Whilst talking to Dietrich about tape noise, for example, that seems to be a total no-no. You know, as a no-no, that is a thing, it comes with it, and therefore it has to stay where it is. Now, I can see both sides. One is the cultural context in which the sound, the music, the whatever it is, lives in, as it were. But then at the other hand, I can see me as an engineer, as a musician in the 80s or whatever, putting stuff onto tape. I didn't want that history. It just came with it because that's all there was. What I wanted was the music to be preserved. Recording sound is in itself preservation. You wouldn't be recording something if you wouldn't want to keep it and have other people listen to it. So in some way, the whole process of recording audio is documenting cultural significance in some way, you know. So I'm personally, I think I'm more on the, yes, improve in the process. Why not? You know, because the aim of what we were trying to begin with at the point of recording was not to introduce artifacts to the sound, the music, the spoken word, whatever it may be. Does that answer that?
So, I believe so. All right. Thank you very much, Peter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.